How many of you have ever, you guys made it? Good, good. They were maybe going to be out of town, so.
There's some seats up here.
Okay, great. The best seat in the house, actually, dead center. So, anyway, so where was I? Oh, yeah. How many of you have ever been to a play? Raise your hand. Been to a play. Everybody in here has been to a play, right? Okay. When a play changes from one act to another, major act, what normally happens?
Intermission.
There's an intermission or what?
Curtain.
Curtains close, and what happens behind the curtain while we're anxiously waiting?
Set change.
Set change. So when the curtain opens back, there's an entirely new set, and everything's ready to go for that particular act, right? Well, that's what God does during this 400 years that we're going to be looking at today is the curtain closes, and then God rearranges almost everything, and then when the curtain opens again in Matthew, there's a whole new set ready to do what God wants to do. And so we're going to look at how that happened. Let me just give you a little bit of background, and I found a guy that worded it very well, so I'm going to try not to read it, but it is so good. His words are better than my words, but just to kind of get you into what's happened before and what the setting is when Malachi closes, and then remind you what the setting is when Matthew opens. So then we can then figure out what's in between. So at the close of the book of Malachi, the nation of Israel is back in the land of Palestine. They're back. Many of them have come back, not all of them, but they're out of Babylonian captivity, but they're still under the domination of the Persians. They're like a puppet state of Persia, but they're at least back in the Holy Land. The temple has been rebuilt. It's much smaller than Solomon's temple, not near as magnificent, but the temple's been rebuilt, and they are restoring. They have restored worship. The priests are in the line of Aaron. All the priests can trace their ancestry back to Aaron. They're carrying out the duties and responsibilities that God had set forth for them to do in the law, and Moses had commanded them to do. So that is going well. What's not going so well is they don't have a king. They don't have a descendant of David on the throne. The line of David is in a little bit of a lot of shambles. There is no king on the throne from David. However, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi name the person that would be king. Zerubbabel is the grandson of the last king of Judah, and he's a guy that is sent back in the first captivity. He's the leader. Remember we talked about Zerubbabel. So he is a descendant of David. He's not made king, however. That would there again under the Persians. The Persians set up a governor, and so Zerubbabel is not crowned king. Now he kind of disappears off the stage, so we don't know what happened to him. There's a lot of speculation. I was reading that perhaps maybe there was some talk of trying to make him king, and that got the Persians' attention. Who knows what happens to Zerubbabel? But he's mentioned that he comes back and he's the leader, the governor, so to speak, for a while. But then he kind of disappears. So they don't have a king, but they are worshiping in the temple, and everything is going fairly well after Babylonian captivity. They do have their weaknesses. Obviously, we talked about the prophets and how they were not doing certain things. They were not tithing like they were supposed to. They were intermarrying. So they have issues. Everything is not perfect. There's no political schism or factions, though, among the Jews. They're not divided into groups or parties. Now, when the New Testament opens, there's no Persians. It's the Romans are all of a sudden on the scene. The Roman Empire has taken over. There's a huge shift in power from the east to the west, to basically to Europe. Rome is controlling everything. They are in charge of the Holy Land, and there's a king on the throne in the Holy Land. Who's the king? That when the New Testament opens, there is actually a king in Jerusalem. Who is it? It's Herod. Some of you mouthed it. That's right. It's Herod. Don't be bashful. You can say Herod is the king. He's not a descendant of Jacob. He's actually a descendant of Esau. He's not the right line. He was put there by the Romans. So we have a king, but the wrong one. The high priest, when Matthew opens, when the New Testament opens, they're not in the line of Aaron. None of the high priests that we deal with in the New Testament can trace their line back to Aaron. It's become a political appointed position, a position that you basically pay for or that your family acquires. It's a position of power, not of religion when we see the high priest in the New Testament. The temple is still the center of worship, even though it's had some difficulty in the meantime, but it is still the center of worship. However, we see this new phenomena in the New Testament, the synagogue. You know, before, when the Old Testament closes, it was just the temple in Jerusalem. When the New Testament opens, there's synagogues everywhere. Every little town has a synagogue, and that's kind of the center of worship, kind of like church for us today. So there's a change there, where the temple is still there, it still serves as an important place, but the synagogue has become kind of the center of worship and the center of the community for them in the New Testament. And then when the New Testament opens, there's 4 major groups in Judaism. They've been split into 4 groups. I'm not going to name them all for today because we'll do that later, but the 2 biggest, the 2 most powerful are the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So they were not around in Malachi, and then all of a sudden in Matthew, they are big and powerful. Consider them like almost like political parties or factions or something on that nature. Now, what happened in these 400 so-called years of silence after the last inspired prophet spoke and before the New Testament writers began to write, that's what we're going to be looking at. We're going to be looking at, well, what all went on? What was God doing behind the scenes to clear the previous stage and to set the new stage to get ready for his son Jesus? Because that's what it's all, the whole Bible, from Genesis to Revelation, is all about Jesus. But God does a pretty amazing thing in just 400 years to get the world ready for what Jesus is going to do. And hopefully when I'm done, whether that's 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks, however many weeks it takes, then you'll go, wow, God was moving in a mighty way, getting the stage set for what was to come. And you know, I'll just let the information speak for itself, because it's just amazing to see what all had happened. And when Jesus comes, he comes on the scene at the perfect moment in time, as far as the political system, the road system, everything in the world. And the Bible speaks to this. Paul writes in Galatians 4:4, but when the fullness of the time came, God sent forth his son, born of a woman. So God is working, and at the exact right moment, Jesus is born. It's not an accident. It was random 400 years. But there was a lot going on. Now, I've said, and you might hear it say, this 400 years of silence, and we need to be very careful about that. When I say 400 years of silence, silence is in accepted, holy, canonized Scripture. Okay? God is clearly working. And so it's not like God took a vacation for 400 years, and understand that, because sometimes people get confused, and sometimes I think even the way I said it last week might have confused a few of you. And there may even be, like some of these stories, since they're not in Scripture, and we're not 100% accurate on, but this person has a dream, or another person has a dream. God may have spoken to them that way, but recorded, canonized Scripture is silent. But clearly, God is moving and doing things, and maybe even speaking. So a little bit of background. You know, I can't just start right where we're supposed to start. We've got to go back a little bit. So there's 8 historical periods of the Old Testament. The dates that are coming up, don't write them down and hold me to those exact dates. Obviously, there's a lot of disagreement, and some people may move it up 20 years, some people may move it back 50 years or something like that. But I'm going to give you a general time frame of dates so you can kind of see the progression of history through the Old Testament, and then we'll start with what happens in between. Go. So the very first thing is creation to the Tower of Babel. I wish they had covered up our little timeline over there. I could point to it, but you guys can picture our timeline over there. But it starts with creation and the story of Genesis, and again, Jesus appears right there in Genesis 1, 2, and 3. And God has a plan from the very, very beginning. I'm not going to reteach that. It'd be like 6 months if I said everything I wanted to say about all of this. But we break down the beginning of the Old Testament in the primeval period. And then you have the patriarchal period. Did I say that right? Patriarchal period, Abraham and Isaac, etc. The fathers of Judaism and the fathers of the world. And, you know, like the song says, you know, Father Abraham had many sons, and I am one of them, and so are you. So we are grafted into this period as well, with the patriarchs and the great people of Abraham's day, and how they got things started. Go. Oh, this is no different than any lesson I ever teach you guys. If you have a question, raise your hand. Or just say, hey, go back or something like that. Because some of the stuff I may go through quickly and some of it we may slow down and I may ask you some questions and stuff. But don't hesitate to go, wait a second, what about it? All right, the Egyptian sojourn and then bondage, basically 1800 to 1446 BC. Again, dates can move slightly, but that gives you a general idea. Again, we're talking about basically 6,000 plus years from that we're going to be looking at. Go. All right, then we have the Exodus and the conquest. I mean, probably one of the best known stories in the Bible involves Exodus, and Lakeside does a great job of that. I mean, Andrew and John coming to the children's department, I don't know how many times they got Exodus and Moses, and I mean, we do a fantastic job teaching that here at Lakeside. And so most of us in the room, if not all of us, very familiar with the Exodus and then Joshua taking over and conquering the land, the promised land from, again, 1446 to 1350 BC. And don't get confused, remember BC is going down and then AD is going up. I mean, most everybody here got it, but I just wanted to say that. Sometimes I even get confused sometimes. Wait a second, is that earlier or later? Go. All right, then the period of the judges is from Joshua until the first king. And what's the first king's name?
Saul.
Saul. Good. So you got Joshua, and then starts the period of the judges. How many judges were there? I'm fixing to hammer y'all real quick, so you don't just get mad. It's okay. How many judges are there? Thought so. It's terrible. Not y'all terrible, but terrible in Christianity how we passive. Never mind. Take a guess. What would be, if you had to guess at a number, what number would you probably pick?
7.
That would be a great number to pick because, 7's a lot. What's another number that's in the Bible a lot? It's not 40.
10.
12. There are 12 judges for the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, name me any one of the 12.
Benjamin.
Good try, but no. Oh, I'm sorry. My bad. I misled you on the question because that is the correct answer on the 12 tribes. I'm sorry. So I don't want, the 12 judges don't correspond directly to the 12 tribes, so there's not a Manasseh and etc. What I should have said is name one of the 12 judges, person's name. Now, I could only get, just so you know, so I wanted you to feel bad. When I first started, I got 4. Is all I could get. But surely everyone here can name at least one judge. Thank you, baby. Samson is a judge.
Deborah? Is Deborah a judge?
Deborah is the only woman of the 12 judges. Very good. We're on a roll now, Mary. Okay, so there's 2. There's one more that everybody knows. Deborah and Samson, knew you would probably get.
Samuel?
Samuel is the priest that takes the Israelites from the judges to the monarchy. So he's variable. He's almost like quasi-judge, but he's not called a judge. Not called a judge. But he's the last. Samson, it's Samson, Samuel, Saul, as far as power goes. Who's in charge? And not directly, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say it that way. You know that when a judge dies, there's not immediately another judge. They go for a period of time. Because a judge is not a political leader. A judge is like a person, almost like a prophet that comes and guides the people for a little while when they need help. They go astray, God sends them a judge. The judge brings them back. The judge helps them conquer whoever is bothering them, usually the Philistines at the end of the time. And then things go pretty good. Then the judge dies. And within about a generation, they go back. God sends them another judge. So judges, don't think of a order in the court. And don't think of king. They're like they're kind of in between. They lead, but they're not a political leader. All right, so come on, there's one more. Think water and lapping and versus licking and Gideon that's the other big one that I thought you. Go ahead, Mary. You're not going to be able to read this, most of you, but there's your 12 judges spread out from where their hometown was and the reference. But if you felt bad and wanted to do better, I have a sheet for you to take and stick in your Bible about the judge in order and the reference. And I don't know if I have enough copies. I got a big crowd. But maybe one per family. If you don't want one, it's not going to hurt my feelings. I'm not even going to watch. Of course, it's on video, so I'll see you later who didn't pick up one. But yeah, pass that around if you want to see the judges. The other one that some of you on your toes might get is the one that made the terrible vow. Anybody, that story sound familiar about he makes a bad vow? He says, Lord, if you'll give me victory, the first thing that comes out of my tent I will sacrifice to you. And he meant an animal, but his daughter comes out first. Then he ends up having to sacrifice his daughter. That story, some of you going, yeah, that's a Jephthah is that judge. And again, none of them are perfect. Samson screwed up big time. Jephthah.
Where's Jephthah on that thing there?
Right.
There he is. And so the judges were not perfect, nor the kings are going to be perfect. They made lots of mistakes. Jephthah was rash in his pledge. But anyway, some of them you may, like I went through the list going, I can't even say, honestly, that I've even heard of Elion or Abdon or Jair I've heard of. But anyway, we've got bogged down on the judges. I want to challenge you to learn your stuff. Dig more into the Bible. Go. Go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry. So then Samuel is the priest that comes along and guides the country from judge to monarchy. Why does this happen, by the way? It's because God wants them to have a king. True or false?
False.
False. God wants to be their king, right? The people demand a king. They ask a king. And we want a king like the what? Like everybody else. Yeah, please, we do that too. I want to be like everybody else. So the Israelites demand a king, and God says, okay, you can have a king. See what happens. Samuel said, this is what's going to happen when y'all have a king. He was like, that's okay, give us a king anyway. And so they get a king. So the first one is Saul, of course. Anyway, I got a chart in a second for that. And then after which king does the kingdom split? Solomon. So Saul, and interestingly, and again, when we covered this months and months and months ago, I pointed this out. But interestingly, if you read the text, God says, okay, for Saul, it says, give them a king like they want. And then when he's telling Samuel to go anoint David, he says, now we're going to give them a king that I want. There is a difference in the wording between Saul and David. Saul was the king like they were asking for, and David's the king like God wants to rule. Okay? So for you visual folks, I have a chart. Saul, David, Solomon. Remember the lesson where Rehoboam and Jeroboam, and I kept getting confused. I would say the wrong one because they're almost the exact same. So Solomon's son is Rehoboam. Jeroboam was not related to Solomon. He was the guy that went down into Egypt and then came back when Solomon dies, and they make him king because Rehoboam is stupid, right? Say right.
Yeah.
Rehoboam was dumb. And so 2 tribes stay with Rehoboam and the 10 go with Jeroboam, and that's the divided kingdom. And again, for your visual folks, a map. So, the nation of Judah and the nation of Israel is the way it's split at the time of Solomon's death, and stays split for a while until the next period of history. We'll get to that in a second. Which one of the two did better than the other one as far as following God more? Which one? I think I heard both. So somebody's right. Judah, yes. Judah is the ones that... Israel, 0 kings followed God. Judah, about half. Again, I have a chart for that in a second too. All right, any questions? I know I'm moving fast. Some of your head's starting to spin. You're having flashbacks to high school history class. And no! Okay, go. There we go. So Israel is a nation for about 210 years, 19 different kings. Yikes. And then there you can see some of what happened to them. In Judah, much longer, but they were following God. A little bit better, so God allows them to hang around longer. 346, also 19 kings, 8 good, and all descendants of David in some shape, form, or fashion. Every single one of whereas Israel, none of them. Well, I don't want to say none. I don't think any of them are descendants of David. Okay, I see a couple of pins moving, so do I need to give you guys, anybody? And actually, some of you going, that looks familiar. I did use this chart for you guys in a different lesson, but it was a while back. Okay, so what, don't hit it. So what follows the monarchy, divided monarchy? What would be the next, you would guess, what would be the next period of time?
Slave. They're enslaved.
Yeah, good. Very good. The exile to post-exilic period. I don't know what kind of professors come up with these titles. Post-exilic period. And this is actually an Assyrian warrior. This is a stone carving of Syrians, or maybe Persian. I don't remember now exactly. Somebody read that for us and tell us. Some Jews being hauled off into captivity by an Assyrian or a Persian, or Babylonian, warrior there. But isn't that kind of cool? I mean, they didn't have photographs back then. That's the way they showed what they did. All right, go. All right, now within that, Israel in the north was destroyed by the Assyrians in 721 BC because they were just doing bad, very bad, and turning away from God. Go ahead. Judah survived longer, as we said a second ago, defeated in 588 BC by the Babylonians, and then the Persians conquered the Babylonians. Now, I used to always get confused about who was what, when, and where. And then one day it just went kaboom and hit me right in the face. And hopefully it's hitting some of you, and if it hasn't hit you yet, I'm going to show you. It goes in alphabetical order. The Assyrians were first, then the Babylonians with a B, and then the Persians. But when we're reading stories, the way we typically do it in Christianity, especially in the Baptist churches, in our class we're doing the chronological through, so it doesn't count this past 2 years. But normally, with Lifeway, and I love Lifeway, I'm not trashing them, but you get a lesson maybe for a month, and then you go off somewhere completely different, and then you don't come back. You never put them together. So you get a lesson about them being hauled off by the Assyrians, and then a year later you get a lesson about, well, wait a minute, they're getting hauled off by the Babylonians, and then 6 months later you get a lesson about the Persian king. What's going on? It's simple. The Assyrians were in charge first. They are defeated by the Babylonians. And then the Babylonians are eventually defeated by the Persians. It's the same geographic area, same basic people, but the name changes and who's in charge changes. But now you should know. A, B, P. Alphabetical order. Yes?
Okay, so the people that were in Israel that got hauled off by the Assyrians,
Yes.
they're in the same area that the people in Judah get hauled off to?
Roughly speaking.
Okay.
The Assyrian Empire on a map is basically the same as the Babylonian Empire, and the Persian Empire, and I'm going to show you in a minute on a map, is basically the same as the Babylonians. So yeah, now the Assyrians hauled people to different places within their empire. The idea was simple. Less rebellion if you haul off the smart people and move them somewhere else, leave the workers, and then bring in the intelligent, smart people from somewhere else you conquered, and they're not going to work together. They're going to be in conflict with one another. And so that was the general idea that the Assyrians, the Babylonians, and the Persians basically follow. Of course, these are the two that do most of the conquering. The Persians inherit the kingdom already and just hold on to it. So that was the general idea. So they move people around. And you can read in the Bible. I just read it in preparation this week. It wasn't important, so I didn't write it down. But you can read where these people get sent. It's recorded where in the Assyrian Empire they're sent. And it's also recorded who is sent into that. You can kind of get that idea. Okay, questions. That was a good question. Ring a bell? King Cyrus. Again, we cover the kings years apart, so we don't get them straight. But anyway, should ring a bell. Okay, so now we're done with not done. We're still in recorded history in the Bible. But now we're starting to shift over, getting closer to that 400 years. What's going on? So we're going to look closely now at the Persians. We're not going to dig into the Assyrians or the Babylonians because the Persians are the last. The ones that, when Malachi ends, they're the ones in charge. So we got to dig a little bit into them. Go. All right, so Persia defeats Babylon in 599 BC. I'm going to give you all a test, by the way. With all the
559 then.
all
If
the,
you're gonna give us a test, read it correctly.
what did I say?
599.
That's my dyslexia kicking in.
Just want to
See,
show
I
that
didn't
we're
even
actually
catch it.
listening.
Yeah, good, very good. I tell my students at school, you know, I always point that out. I switch a number around. Most of the time, I catch it. I did. Thank you, Tim. 559. Did I say 99 or 95?
I said 99, I think.
Go. Okay, then where we left off over the past few months, with the exiles returning, King Cyrus allows the exiles to return home in 538 BC. How many waves of return are there?
3.
Yes. We hammered that over the past 2 months. Is there were 3 waves of exile, 3 waves of return. Coincidence? I doubt it. I'm being sarcastic. No coincidence. Go. All right. Some elect to stay. We've covered that. I mean, we didn't focus on that. We talked about people leaving, but clearly not everybody goes in any of the 3 waves, and so there are Jews that choose to stay around. And when you go, it's in the news a lot, especially over the past 10 years or so. But Jews in Iraq and Iran and Syria, people like, well, you would expect Jews to be living there, but there are Jewish communities in these countries today. That's why they didn't go back home. They chose to stay in the Persian Empire, which then, when you break it out in modern times, is Iran and Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria and all of that area is the Persian Empire that we're looking at. And so there are Jewish communities in those areas even today, which for many years they surprisingly got along well until recent history, when the more radicalized Muslims have taken over, then you start to have issues. But for many, many years, these Jewish communities, since they've been there for 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 years, 2,000 years, live fairly peacefully. Go. And just a review, I couldn't help throwing in another review. Bible characters during the Persian period: Ezra, Nehemiah, Zerubbabel, Esther, Malachi, and Haggai. So we do have, again, we're still in recorded history in the Bible during the beginning and middle of the Persian period. So we had lessons on Ezra, Nehemiah. We mentioned Zerubbabel. We had a lesson on Esther. 2 lessons on Malachi. Haggai, I'm sure we did, but it was a little bit back further. But in recent weeks, we've covered all of those people except for Haggai. And by the way, that's what Cyrus looked like. At least that's the statue of Cyrus. And who knows if he really sat there and let the guy or not. But that is a archaeological discovery of a statue of King Cyrus. I like his crown. Okay, go. So, there is the Persian Empire at its height, stretching into Egypt, including the Holy Land, obviously, and then going down into the Persian Gulf, all the countries I just mentioned a second ago, going up into Turkey, and even a little bit into what is today Greece, which is what's going to bring about the whole changing of the setting, as the Persians are going to attempt to conquer all of Greece. And that's where a guy appears on the scene. You may have heard of his name, Alexander the Great. Yeah, but it's all related. And I never really connected it in school or in my early years of being a Christian as an adult, how the Persians just right in, and the Greeks right there. All the Bible lays it all out for us and sets the stage. Go. Unless you got a question about the map. Go ahead. All right. Again, a little bit of review from what we've been covering. The Second Temple is dedicated. It's rebuilt. Did they have an easy time of it? They did not have an easy time of it, but they eventually get the temple built and dedicated under the Persians. Go ahead. Nehemiah comes in and sets them straight. Again, we had lessons over the past month about this. Reinstates the tithe. That was a couple weeks ago. The Levites need the money. Has them doing the right thing on the Sabbath, and they mixed marriages, deals with all of that. So all of that is happening under the watchful eye of the Persians, with the Jews being semi-autonomous. They're like a puppet. They got their own governor, but they still answer to the Persian king. Go. Now, we're leaving the Bible behind. We're clinging to the Bible always. But as far as history is concerned, Malachi has stopped. And now what happens? First slide of the 400 years. Talking about Hellenistic period. What is called the Hellenistic period. Not starting, but Alexander the Great is the one that really has the most influence. Go. Okay, so connecting it all together. The Persians are the dominant power when we leave Malachi, right? Never even heard of the Greeks. Not mentioned. Nobody's. Bunch of little individual, who knows their history. There were a bunch of individual city-states, that's right. Bunch of little city-states not working together at all. The Persians, they've gone big. Let's take all of Greece. And so they attempt to do that first under King Darius in the Bible, and then Xerxes in the Bible. The Bible doesn't describe the trying to conquer Macedonia or Greece, but those kings, Persian kings, are specifically mentioned in the Bible, of course. Go.
So,
Yes.
so we're really still in the Bible?
No, okay.
Okay, I'm confused.
The Bible doesn't talk about the invasion of Macedonia.
Okay.
The Bible does mention the kings that are doing it, so it depends on your way of looking at it. Yeah, there's a parallel course running, I guess, so far. But the Bible makes no mention of Macedonia or Greece in the Malachi or any of them. So they're stopped. Hit the next one, too. And for you big history buffs, and I don't know where D was, he said he was coming today. I even threw the Navy one in there just for him. But 3 battles, there's more than 3, but some that you might recognize if you didn't snooze through your history class. The Battle of Marathon. Anybody run marathons? Me neither. How long is a marathon?
26.2.
How many?
26.2.
26? Some 25? 25, 26? Something like that? Or is the official now 26? But I don't run, so I don't know. So, will you remember the story? This is a cool story about why we have marathons today. It's because of the Battle of Marathon. They sent a runner. Now, the story, I'm fixing to bust some of y'all's bubble. The story that's popular now is probably not exactly true. But let me tell you the story that everybody likes to tell, and then I'll tell you what really happened. How about that? Okay, the story that everybody likes to tell is the Greeks defeat the Persian army under Darius, and they send a runner. He has a name. I'm not going to try and say it. I didn't write it down. P something. P-B-I something. To go to Athens and to tell them that they won. He runs the 25 miles to Athens, gives them the report. They were all waiting to hear the news of the battle. Says, we won. Says Nike, which is victory. And they all chant yay, and then he dies. Collapses from exhaustion. That's the story that you might get told today about where we get a marathon from. That's probably not true. That doesn't show up until a lot later in history. What actually happened is 2 stories put together. There actually is a guy with the P name that is sent from the battlefield to Sparta to get the Spartans to send their troops. So he runs the much longer distance. It takes him 2 days. So he runs over 2 days to go to Sparta and get Sparta to send reinforcements. The battle's over. The Greeks win, but the Persians still have a very large army. And what they decide to do, the Persians are pretty smart. Here's all the Greek army. Let's get in our boats, because they had a whole huge navy. And let's sail down to undefended Athens and destroy Athens. So then the Greek army force marches from the battlefield to Athens, 25 miles away, and arrives before the Persians do and block them landing on the shore. And so the story is probably those 2 put together is what happened. It's still an amazing feat that they force marched the 25 miles and arrived before the Persians did on boat. After they just fought a battle, the Persians just kicked back and saved Athens. But that's the story of Marathon. Now, if you like the one where he died better, then fine, go with that. But it's just probably not true. It's probably the combination of the 2 stories. The runner going and then them force marching the distance. Thermopylae, it's one of my favorite battles in all of history, even though the Greeks lose. Anybody know what happens at Thermopylae?
We We've never heard of any of those.
Everybody's heard of marathon, sweetheart. You've heard of a marathon where people run, right?
Yes.
I'm so upset about the marathon story. I'm going to quit running.
Look, you shouldn't be upset. The true story is actually better than the made-up one.
I'm so upset.
Because the guy runs further, and then the whole army makes the 25-mile jaunt from the battlefield to Athens. So it's even better. Thermopylae is the 300, the Spartan story, the movie 300, or the Here Come the Spartans, the one in the 60s or 70s. Is much better, by the way. You know, if you don't like the blood and gore of the 300 one about the Battle of Thermopylae, the 1970s, 60s one is just as good without all of that mess. It's where the Spartan hold the pass at Thermopylae against, there's some estimates go from 30,000 up to 1,000,000 Persians, and there's basically about 1,000 Greeks, and they hold the pass for 7 days, allowing the rest of the Greek army to form, and then when they're finally defeated by treachery, a local guy shows the Persians that there's a little trail, and they come around and get behind them, and then they attack them from both ways and kill them all. Leonidas is the Spartan king. So that's a true story. That happens. That's at Thermopylae. And then Salamis is the naval battle where Xerxes' his navy is basically crushed and forces the Persians to retreat.
Whew.
That was a lot, wasn't it, Mary?
That was.
Mary saying, I didn't approve that one. That was all script too, but I like it. Go. We'll stop with Alexander, so those of you getting itchy, we'll stop here in just a second. That's actually a statue of Alexander. Again, probably fairly close to what he actually looked like. So the Persians, let me get back focused. So the Persians are the dominant world power. I mean, if the Persians know about you, they've taken you over. I mean, they don't know about China and Japan, and they don't know about the Native Americans. But if they know about you, the Persians have taken you over, except for the Greeks. So the Persians say, well, let's take over the Greeks. The Greeks, heavily outnumbered in all of those battles. The Greeks should have gotten crushed. They don't. They stop the Persians, and then once you stop them, then Alexander's father unifies the city-states more or less. Alexander takes over, solidifies the unification of the Greek city-states, and then says, let's go attack the Persians. Still outnumbered, but the Greeks then take the fight to the Persians, and Alexander is not called the Great because he defeated a few people. He's called the Great because he took over the entire Persian Empire. Go ahead. And as Alexander progresses from Greece through Turkey and heads down toward the Holy Land, the Jews are pretty smart. They switch over and go, hey, we don't like the Persians. Yay, Alexander. The Samaritans and the Judeans, the Jews, switch loyalties and offer their allegiance to Alexander. And there's a super cool story about that. And Alexander approaching Jerusalem. But I'm going to make you wait and come back next week for that. One more. I want to see. Yeah, so Alexander's approaching Jerusalem and show up next week. And I'll show you how God appeared in that moment and saves Jerusalem from destruction under Alexander and actually gives the Jews a favorable position from Alexander. So be back next week. I got almost where I thought I would. So, questions? That's bad, no questions.
What were the dates, like of the Hellenistic period?
Just go back, Mary. I don't have a memory.
I'm going. So where did it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Total. From. I have it somewhere. I'll have it for you next week if I don't find it right here in a second. From 330 until 60 BC, somewhere in there. I will have to get the exact dates for you. Basically, the Romans take over in about 60, 70 BC. That's next week. Thank you. Question?
You know, when you have Alexander the Great, but you know the empire,
Persian
Empire, you know, somebody's gotta make a decision. I know maybe Alexander the Great's gonna destroy what you have, but the Persians, you know, if they're bigger and stronger, and you know, somebody's got to decide whose side you're going to go with.
Oh, you're talking about when the Jews swapped?
Yeah.
Yeah. Basically, the situation is you have a bunch of, the Persians have conquered a whole bunch of people, and they are now then subservient to the Persians.
Yeah.
But they're kind of semi-autonomous, which the Jews are, and so they might not have a Persian garrison there. So a lot of people, when Alexander comes rolling through, go, hey, we'll be your buddy now. You know, they swap. The Persians were definitely larger. What the Greeks were able to do is they were better skilled. They had better tactics. Alexander's army was smaller than the Persian army every single time he fought them. And he beat them every time. Better tactics and better weapons and stuff like that.
So the Persians basically got themselves too thin.
Yeah, pretty much. They got too big. But Alexander's going to take over everything that was Persian, and he's going to have it. But we'll see. And then the Romans are able to hold it for a long, long time. The Persians are dominant power for a long time. But yeah, they basically got too big. They overreached when they went after the Greeks. The Greeks defeated them in Greece, and then realized that we can beat them in Persia, and then invade. Yeah, good question.
They are greedy.
The Persians?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in the northern kingdom, that
The 10 tribes in the north. So we're talking about Israel?
so I heard them referred to as the lost.
The lost tribes, yes.
So I took that to mean like they don't exist?
They don't come back officially. It's the Babylonians, the 2 tribes in the south. Judah is the one that returns. The 10 tribes in the north are dispersed, and there's no record of them officially, the tribe of Dan or the tribe of Manasseh, coming back. Now, odds are individuals do sprinkle back in and come back. But they are called the lost tribes because today a Jew cannot trace their lineage back to one of those 10 tribes. Because the Assyrians, God was very mad at the 10 tribes in the north. And so they don't officially return like Judah does. And of course, there's a reason why Judah has to return intact. And what is that?
Levites.
And
The priest.
Jesus, of course. If Judah disappeared, then no Messiah. So Judah has to come back. So it's only the southern nation that officially returned. When the Bible talks about the return, it's talking about Judah. But again, I've read a ton of stuff where a lot of scholars, some of those people came back. Some people never left. I remember they left the poor people, even the Assyrians. And so there was some people from Dan and Benjamin and Manasseh and all those people were still there. There's no record of them ever returning. And it's difficult for a Jew today to trace their lineage back through any of those 10, if not impossible. Okay, well, I had a lot of fun. I don't know if you guys did or not. Some of you got that glazed over. I was in history class, but some of you appeared to be, it was okay. So next week, we're going to look at then what Alexander did, how that led to the Romans. We're going to look at the creation of the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Zealots and the Essenes and what brought all them on. We're going to talk about the Maccabees and the beginning of the Hasmonean rule. We're going to go all the way through, not next week, but eventually. I'm going to take you all the way through to when Jesus arrives, Herod is king, how did that happen, and the Romans are in charge. We're going that far. So anyway,
Woohoo!
thank you for the enthusiasm. If there are no other questions, then prayer request.
Some friends of ours